Hello and welcome to the Untold Radio Network. My name is Jay Katz and you're on Down South Anomalies for a very special episode. And I'm sorry to Dr. Christopher Noel, it's episode 13, but I believe it's the first time he's actually ended up talking to Australia. We're very excited about that, to have him in the Southern Hemisphere. And of course, I'm joined each week by my profound wife, Aspasia.
Thank you, Jay. But first of all, we need to actually do acknowledgement to country. And we want to say that we are broadcasting from stolen land, and we want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging.
Yeah, it's really important that each week we actually get that clear. And I think that's the first time we've got it completely clear.
Now it was a bit shaky, but hey.
Christopher Noel is no ordinary person. I believe this is like the Taoist monk of anomalous cryptid research.
Mm-hmm.
When we first came across his material, we were emotionally struck.
We were.
By how beautiful this man commands himself.
Absolutely.
But he is a scientist, as far as I'm concerned. He has a master's degree in philosophy from Yale University. He also has been a teacher with over 2 decades of teaching behind him.
Mm-hmm.
He also has an MFA. Well, I'm going to have to ask him what that means because we're outside of the orthodox system.
We are.
He is an author.
Yes.
A lecturer,
mm-hmm.
a documentarian. He runs what I believe is one of the most profound and insightful sites that YouTube ever has had.
Yep.
Impossible Visits.
Yep.
He is a field researcher. He's had over 17 years of field research, and he lives in a cohabitation site. And I think one thing that Roger Stankovic spoke to us from MUFON is that, you know, there is proof there that the incredible truth about this phenomena is actually in plain sight.
Yes.
It's right in front of us, and we're missing it 9 times out of 10. Now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big Southern Hemisphere welcome to the one and only Christopher Noel.
Yay.
Where's the applause clip?
I mean, we need to cut that in, and we need to get the laugh track happening as well, Chris.
Yeah,
no laugh track.
No. Hey,
thank you so
much. I'm very humbled and flattered by your introduction, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm amazed. I'm speaking to you between northern Vermont and Sydney, Australia. It's an astonishing piece of technology that we have at our fingertips, and it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be on your show with you.
Well,
and with your cat.
It is a real privilege, and it's real humbling. And I guess, you know, that's part of living in the city with part of the wilderness. We have a very strong relationship with all the animals we live with. And our cat Anton is suffering a little bit of dementia and a little bit of loss for his loved one, our other hairless cat Lilith, that died recently. But we will live with Anton screaming in the background. It just adds to it. Maybe tell us about that degree, your teaching and your background there at Yale. Tell us about how you came across doing that and how many years you've been teaching. And you teach writing, don't you?
Well, that's water under the bridge for me. It's been many years now since I was teaching in the MFA program. Means a Master of Fine Arts.
Okay. Right. Okay.
And so I published a few books, and I got a teaching job. For 20 years, I taught at Vermont College Master of Fine Arts program. But then, partly because I had become captivated by Sasquatch research, my relationship with that establishment organization began to diminish because they didn't respect that work, as many people don't, as you probably know yourself. And the books I was publishing in my Sasquatch research weren't being published by traditional publishers because it's a fringe subject, very difficult to place, to find a home with in traditional publishing. So I was publishing them independently, and that sort of soured my relationship with the academic world. And so I stepped away from that and became a freelance editor of people's books. and that's how I pay my bills. Because as you may know, also Sasquatch research does not make one wealthy.
No, it doesn't.
I,
Very
I,
wealthy.
I think that whole publishing world has changed, and with great sadness that the recognition of independent publishing is not acknowledged. So a lot of history is lost. It's not recorded. It's not taken into the Library of Congress and held. It's forgotten about. And when we look at the nature of history and the convolution of that history, so much truth is in the pages of independent press because it doesn't sit under the same restrictions.
Well, there's no gatekeeper, and gatekeepers often will, mute the truth, or more importantly, they won't embrace work that goes outside of the consensus reality that we've, been brought up with. And so independent publishing used to be called self-publishing, and it is self-publishing, but that's a sort of a pejorative term. You know how a few years ago bloggers used to be looked down on because you can't find a newspaper or a magazine to publish it. Now bloggers run the world, and they're not down on anymore. And increasingly, there's no longer a stigma. Anyway, so I published my Sasquatch books through Amazon, and I'm very happy to have done so because I've been able to reach my readership, my audience, and try to disseminate some of what I've learned as a student of the Sasquatch species. So it's very, very important to have that outlet.
It's an astounding number of books. How many books are you up to? And you've just released another one on the autism theory that you've pronounced around this species.
I just have a handful, like 5 books about Sasquatch over the last 12 years or so, and I'm happy. I'm just it always makes me surprised and happy when people in far-flung parts of the world reach out to me and say that they've read my book, because one writes in a vacuum and sort of puts it out there, and it often feels like it goes into a black hole. And so it's very gratifying when people such as yourself give you feedback, and you realize, hey, I do reach some people, and it's very nice, very good to know that.
You reach us all profoundly because you're coming to me from a very scientific, academic, credentialed level, but you're able to, in your writing is enchanting, and it leads the reader further. It's just every book I've picked up on yours is a page turner. And I have to also thank you so much for the field guide to Sasquatch structures, because that's a book every time I go for a bushwalk, or I end up going out there and it may have nothing to do with this subject matter, I put that in my back pocket and I pull it out to just profoundly affect everyone with us. As I start reading it and make no mention of it, and people come up to me and go, "What is that book?" And I say, "You don't know this book?" You know?
It's so astounding to me that it applies those same structures, those same few archetypal forms of stick and tree structures are found in Russia, in Scotland, in Australia, in China.
Yeah.
You can go on and on. In France and Germany. It seems that the species, there it is now. It seems that the species has an affinity with just certain forms that make them feel at home in the forest, that make them feel as though this is their signature, their kind of ownership of, or it allows them to appropriate and make their own the forest that they inhabit in their territory. And then 99% of our species kind of just waltzes through and doesn't notice them, because many times they're subtle. And even if they're not subtle, people assume, well, kids must have made those. So what you need to do, and very few people do this, is once you find these structures, then put out an audio recorder and record at night after night after night, and then retrieve it and listen to these recordings in real time, because you can't always spot important sound clips just by looking at the spectrogram, on the computer. You need to listen through 8 hours, 10 hours. And if you hear wood knocks, or if you hear vocalizations or speech or trees being pushed down, you figure, well, 99% chance that those actors who you're hearing are also the ones who made these structures.
Mm.
You can never be 100% sure unless you film one making a structure. Nobody's done that yet. But
No.
it only makes sense because all higher primates, including ourselves, manipulate our environment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it would be shocking if Sasquatch, with their big brain and their huge muscles, didn't also manipulate their environment. And if they do so, we're going to be able to notice the manipulations, unless they clean it up every single time, which they don't.
No.
And then these structures are what we notice, and it's, you know, pretty obvious to me that they are that they're in the building trade, in addition to being to having other qualities.
Well, all of us love to decorate our home, and I think that there's part of that. But the interesting thing to me is how those structures actually become an incredible link in your theory about the autistic savant. And we're all aware that in autism, that the autistic person, the individual, will use a lot of structures that seem like an obstacle to impair their fear of direct communication. But what is termed as an obstacle to me may actually be a profound sign of communication to begin with. And
That's
so
brilliant.
and so those structures are literally screaming out, "We are here and be aware." Maybe.
Well, that's really well put. I like that. You don't want to overgeneralize, but many autistic people will structure their environment so as to make order out of what otherwise feels chaotic and threatening and invasive, you know, from the human world around them. So they often will make internal structure to comfort themselves and to order themselves against entropy. Internal structures like memorizing the train schedule of the UK or any number of other memorization projects, routines that they can go through in their head. And then there's external structures where they'll line up their toys, or they will stack things up, or they'll parallel things, or they'll make interesting arrangements of their objects, their belongings. And it's very important that these things remain in the right order. And that can make, apparently, and I've read memoirs of autistic folks, and they attest to this directly. It makes them feel more grounded, less at the mercy
of control.
Less out of control. It's a matter of control. That's the exact word for it.
Yeah.
And so I think Sasquatch live quite in opposition to the popular conception of them as marauding monsters roving around. They wouldn't have been able to survive this long alongside of us if they weren't very controlled and very deliberate in their actions most of the time. Every now and then, of course, they act out, and so do autistic people. They act out in frustration and anger, but I think that 99.9% of the time they're highly aware of and in control. In control of their movements and watching us and memorizing our routines so that they can occupy the negative space to our positive space, or they can occupy the positive space to our
avoid
negative.
us.
However you want to look at it, avoid us, but also there's this deep kinship between our species. So they not only avoid us like the plague, but they seek us like the cure. That's kind of a little motto I came up with. Because they make overtures toward people at habituation sites. They make
it's all right. Ignore him.
roar outside our windows sometimes to fight the kitty, and they indirectly interact with us, but hardly ever directly. And I could go on and on about the various forms of indirect interaction. But,
well, I'd love you to, but the most important thing, if I digress to that point that you said originally, is we're looking at an entire globe of incidents. And what we look at in this research, and if we're to do it from a scientific perspective, is you statistically pull out the consistencies. And there is a huge consistency, and I hear it on Sarah Bignell's site, Dean's site there, Australian Yowie Hunters, is this stimming. Is this notion of rocking backwards and forwards. And we work with a lot of people that had been institutionalized all their life and showed adult forms. They'd lived into a long life because they were, in a sense, under protection, but brutalized by that system they were in. But we would see stimming in these people, even in their 60s and 70s. And also the other thing we saw was their ability to hide in plain sight. We had residents in our nursing home that would literally disappear. And for hours, we'd literally have the police on the phone and we'd find them behind a shower curtain in the bathtub with just a quarter of that shower curtain pulled. But it was in a way that we weren't even picking it up in our peripheral vision. But it showed us that heightened form of intellect when it came to this way of avoiding one-on-one contact.
And just kind of a spatial genius.
Yes.
I mean, and this is why I make the connection to autistic savants and not profoundly disabled autistic people. Some have thought that I'm reducing Sasquatch to some sort of a diagnosis, but in fact, I'm elevating both autistic people and Sasquatch in the category of savants, because they're ingenious, and they, Sasquatch would have to have these gifts of perception, of photographic memory, of patience, of memorizing human routines, in order to survive at all. And they make the structures, as we talked about, and they sway back and forth, which is like stimming. And they also, think about it. If they didn't knock on wood, they would be 10 times, 25 times more difficult to study. They, for their own good, they should just use animal sounds that they can interpret as language, but that we would just think are ordinary animals. But instead, they bang on trees, which is only us and something with hands can do that. So they are giving themselves away. They're giving the game away frequently and willingly. And I think it's because there's some sort of a hardwired need for percussion. And autistic people have this need too. I think it's like an energy, a getting rid of energy. And so they may not think of it this way. They communicate through knocks, and they make their presence known through knocks. But I think that over the eons, this knocking behavior has become embedded in their very DNA, and they can't help it anymore. But it's also embedded in the DNA of Homo sapiens, autistic people. And I don't ever say that there's an identical relationship between the two kinds of autism. I have a hunch that back thousands and thousands of years ago, our common ancestor, us and Sasquatch, probably had some autistic traits that had a positive survival benefit. And then these traits, when that origin story managed to originate our line, our evolutionary branch, and Sasquatch evolutionary branch, we both evolved down through time, and our traits are both similar and different. There's an overlap with our autistic savants and Sasquatch nature and behavior. There's an overlap, but there's also difference. And I mean, just briefly, one difference is that they seem to be able to engage in group behavior among themselves. So it's not a solitary autism that they have. It's more like a group. It's more like we're the other. Our species is the other. Whereas for them, and they are sort of a group mind, coordinated very, very tightly and effectively in their groups. And they see us as the other. Whereas for our autistic people, each individual sees other individuals as the other. And they need to communicate, if at all, indirectly. Whereas the species of Sasquatch as a whole communicates with our species indirectly. So there's that difference, and there's other differences, of course. But I think that it's an evolutionary shared heritage that we have with them.
It'd be very interesting to actually do a study historically of Indigenous interaction. And this is a global thing as well. And this is where you get someone like Jane Goodall, one of the world's leading primatologists, going, you cannot ignore the
Or
history
discount,
of Indigenous relationships with this species. And there seems to have been a critical point where here with our Indigenous Aboriginal population, the North American Indians, that it was sort of discussed on this level that there needs to be a separation. And maybe that separation then would be marked by these wood structures. And I think it looks at that point, it's sort of like running parallel with our notion of, the beginning of civilization, mass harvesting, and the terraforming of the planet, in a sense, where we started to destroy and cut into nature. I mean, when you look at a caster Bigfoot and you've got the mid-tarsal break, that is a foot that is so equipped to deal with an undulating environment. Our foot needs to walk on a flat surface.
We need shoes.
We need to terraform our environment.
Yeah.
We can't adapt to the environment. We need to terraform it. Yet these particular parallel hominids seem to pivot like a ballerina on a cliff face.
Pivot in what sense? In what situation?
That foot has much maneuverability, agility,
yeah.
and so they're able to adapt to the environment out there much more easier than us. And so I think, I'm sorry that this is a bit of a winded pronouncement here, but what I'm trying to say is, do you think there was a point where this species realized that we're actually cutting into their environment, and they had to come to an understanding with human beings, and that is, leave us certain areas and you can go and do what you do. And now we're impinging more and more into their environment. We're beginning to see them more and more.
That may be true in Australia. It's a surprising fact that in North America, there are more undeveloped forest lands now than there were a century ago.
Wow.
So
I didn't realize that.
I used to have, there's some statistics about that in the tree structure book that you mentioned before, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. But through land management and forestry laws, we've managed to regain a lot of especially in the eastern half of the United States. Yeah, there's some stats I have in there, some quotations from resources, informational resources about forest land. But the general question is, did indigenous peoples back in the day have a much closer, more direct relationship with Sasquatch than we do today? And I'm of two minds on that. If I'm right in my hypothesis about autism, then it has ever been thus, and that perhaps the oral history of many Native American, Native Australian tribes, and North American, and all throughout the world, is not to be taken quite literally. Like they have origin myths. Like, for instance, some tribes say that the earth is on the back of a turtle, but you don't take that literally. So it may be that they traded with Sasquatch and played back and forth with sort of object gifting and rearrangement, like a chess game, like people do sometimes. Like in North America, we have a wonderful researcher named Snow White Bigfoot.
Yes, we adore her,
yeah, she's
and
fabulous.
she is so gentle, and I can see the stress she's gone through because she's in perpetual cohabitation on her property, isn't she?
Well, she doesn't feel it as stress; she feels it as a joy. Her stress is that she's not able to communicate this joy to a wider audience.
Yes.
But so she has a relationship, a close relationship, but it's indirect. It's through objects. It's mediated by these objects, and so it may be that stories you hear about interactions between native humans and Sasquatch are a way of saying the same thing. Like, we usually don't have, what am I trying to, the word asynchronous. We have an asynchronous relationship. Like, we'll leave an arrangement of marbles on the porch, and some hours later, in the middle of the night usually, our local Sasquatch group one of them will come and rearrange the marbles, or turn all the dice from 1 on top to 6 on top, but they're still perfectly flush with each other. So it doesn't happen at the same time. So it may be that it's always been like that. More like autistic people often will communicate through cards, through symbols, through objects, rather than directly with eye contact and speech, direct like you and I are doing. And so it may be, but I don't know anything about it. I'm just saying it's possible that the tales of direct relationships with Sasquatch and Native Americans, Native Australians is a translation of a sort of a more indirect relationship that we still find today. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I have no idea. And many hundreds of thousands of people know better than I do what they're talking about with regard to the history of native peoples. I don't.
I think the jury's in for the majority of us. It's still a question of debate, and that's why it's so fascinating that you're so open and you're open to actual other ideas. I think it was really interesting what you brought up about the percussive nature of Sasquatch. And there are many stories here to do with our Indigenous population and the music that they were making out there tribally, and then all of a sudden they'd turn around and they would find a group of this species just sitting there passively taking in that music. I mean, humanity still doesn't understand exactly what is music. And I mean, from a physiological perspective, we can put it down to a replication of our heartbeat in terms of that percussive nature. But there's something profound that you'd be aware of musicology wise, and that is that, you can have a stroke, and before the speech centers of your brain will rebuild themselves, you will be able to sing. So there's something there about music crossing over both cerebellums and being something quite profound that we still don't entirely understand.
Also, extreme advanced cognitive impairment can leave somebody unable to communicate, but when you play a song from their childhood, they will sing along. So it's a very deep-seated, profound experience of music. And it's the heartbeat, but it's also the energy release.
Yes.
And the sort of like having some vibration with something other than oneself, a vibration back and forth. One feels grounded in the world, in reality, in a way that, without music and without some other kind of structure, one can feel afloat, But the music and art and ritual and dance will root us to the earth.
And that Taoist notion of being alive in the moment. I had a band, because of my background in mental health, I was noticing a lot of incredible individuals that had a great musicology, but they would become quite discordant or start mixing up Eastern scales with traditional English scales. And so they couldn't turn their Casios on in the nursing home, Chris. And they were seen as like, this is disturbing, it's chaotic. This was the early 80s. Everyone was trying to be weird and abstract and experimental. So I thought the only power I can give these individuals is a PA and a live audience. So I created a band with what I thought were some of the most stable. At times they weren't. And during those periods of performing live on stage, they were so uplifted that physical side effects from oil-based medications like tardive dyskinesia, which is its damage, would be alleviated. I mean, that was like a miracle. It would disappear. And they were performing. Maybe it would come back quite boldly after they'd stopped performing. But I was noticing these things that weren't supposed to be happening medically. And it seemed that music was an incredible therapy in that regard.
Yeah.
Do you remember the movie Awakenings?
Yes, yes.
So that's the same sort of thing. They would dance and come out of their frozen state for just a few minutes. It was absolutely heartbreaking. For a few minutes, they could dance together. I think it was he would administer L-Dopa, right? Dopamine.
Yes.
It wasn't just music, but it was a similar kind of unlocking and allowing for a fluidity and a flow that then got shut back down right afterwards. And it's really hard, so sad.
I lived through like nearly a decade of my mother with Alzheimer's, which became those moments. But there would be moments of complete cognitive response. Lucidity was astounding. The other thing I want to speak to you deeply about is the notion of what you see with savants is a higher sort of psi power. Now, this is getting into very exotic territory that most scientists are not going to cope with. But there are scientists out there that have profoundly done peer research on this, and one of them is Rupert Sheldrake. So I don't know how you feel about Sheldrake's work and even this notion now of panpsyism, which is, are we living in a sea of consciousness? Is all matter, in a sense, alive and has a relationship? And there seems to be, and from a lot of the reports locally here, there seems to be a real telepathic nature to these creatures.
Tell me some about your experience down there with this, because I have I've done research into telepathy and Sasquatch in North America. And have a book called Mind Speak, which is what some people call it up here. Do you have very similar stories in Australia?
Yes, we do have very similar stories, and I think I've got the wrong book up there, but anyway,
it's entirely the wrong book.
Well, that's the classic work,
That's the class, the classic.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful, and a much more better rendered image. Anyway, that aside, I can only tell you secondhand, and there was a religious studies program we had on the Australian broadcaster called Compass.
Oh, yes.
And it's a very well-respected program. And there's an area not far from us.
Is it Compass or the other one?
I'm pretty sure it was Compass.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I've got that wrong.
Catalyst.
Okay. Now, Compass was the religious studies.
Yes,
that was the one I appeared on when I drove the Mission Beat van. We're in our 60s. We're losing it.
I'm in my 60s too. That was a great example of teamwork. You came up with the right answer through teamwork.
You know what? We've both said we're highly flawed individuals that come together to make one reasonable one.
Absolutely.
Reasonable. Only slightly flawed. Yeah.
Only reasonable.
Yeah.
And that program spoke about, and I had friends that were co-researchers that had gone up there, and there was a high occurrence, especially in the female population, of having even like things that verged on erotic dreams involving what seemed to be them in a cohabitation site. So they would get pronounced thoughts, they would even get erotic imagery, they would get language at times. And that's, I'm telling you that from a secondhand perspective. But I'm sure when you come to do Yowie Central, where you're going to end up all over Australian media very soon.
Yeah.
But with Sarah Bignell, that she will be able to go into much more direct information about that. But I think, again, it's another consistency that is worldwide.
Well, and it was very interesting to me when I found out that there's a researcher named Diane Hennessy Powell. Are you familiar with her?
No, I'm not.
Good. I get to introduce you and your audience to her.
Right.
Diane
That's what we like.
Hennessy, Hennecy, and then Powell. She's the only one who's done in-depth research into the link between autistic savants and telepathy, and other sort of psychic gifts that seem to far outweigh the general population in terms of the prevalence in autistic savants. So you watch a few of her interviews on YouTube. Those of you listening to this, watching this, and you guys.
And they're on your Impossible Channels site, aren't they? Because I'm remembering now I actually saw a segment, maybe?
Maybe, yes. I put a segment in one of my videos, but you should go directly to the source, Diane Hennessy Powell, And she has a book called The ESP Enigma, and she also has lots of interviews on YouTube where she explains her experiments. She's done remarkable laboratory, highly controlled, rigorous experiments with a girl. I can't remember her name, an autistic 9-year-old girl. And there's a barrier between the girl and the experimenter, and the experimenter will, has this like what is it? A random letter and number generator, and the numbers and the letters will come up, and then the girl will write them down, and 98% of the time they're exactly the same. And she is found both in India and in North America. That's where she's focused. She's found this high correlation between autistic savantism and this psychic power or
ability.
Insight. Ability. And so that seems to me to relate to how Sasquatch seem to be more proficient psychically than most of us are. Mm-hmm. And they also have this whole other laundry list of autistic traits. And I think that the original species that we both came from, it probably was communicated largely mentally. And it would be a great evolutionary advantage, you have to admit. But maybe they've devolved a little, so now they have to use a lot of knocking. So but one time at a habituation site in East Texas, I was talking to my friend who was in mental touch with a local Sasquatch, and we've lost a lot of viewers at this point, but that's okay. And I said, well, why do they need to knock on wood when they can just converse mentally? And she said, well, it's like with a cell phone. We can talk, but that doesn't tell people where we're located if you forget about GPS. Mm-hmm. And so they can talk, but they don't know exactly where they are in a physical space. So that's why they augment it with knocking on trees. And so that's pretty cool.
It breaks my heart that you actually reached that point of pause and said we've lost a lot of viewers. That should not be the way. When you look at Rupert Sheldrake's work, it is peer-reviewed. It is solid science. And all of us are aware deep within our own DNA that our intuition at times alerts us to things that are not an orthodox way of being aware of. And that if you looked at that...
You've seen Rupert Sheldrake's studies on dogs and cats anticipating their owner's return.
Oh, yes.
It's not that they hear the car coming around the corner, because it's before the car is even 2 miles away, and they have a video monitor in the house, and the owner comes home at a completely different time from normal. Different time every day, and then they show the cats and the dogs reacting a couple minutes or 5 minutes before the owner gets back.
They know. Yeah, I know. I saw one where the guy used to catch the same train, so he wasn't even driving, and then would walk from the train station, caught the train at a totally different time of the day, like 2 hours before he was supposed to come home.
And the dog goes to the door?
And the dog went straight to the door 5 minutes before he turned up. So it's something other than learning someone's behavior or time schedule. It's just there's something else with that we don't understand. We can't explain.
I think we've either lost that memory of that. I mean, most parents.
Or now sometimes you're thinking so strongly about somebody and the phone rings and they're on the phone and you're like, is that a coincidence or was that?
I've never known how to think about that. I've never known how to think about that particular one, because a lot of times I think of people and they don't call. So you'd have to measure the entire background of that,
I suppose,
against when they do call. But interestingly, Temple Grandin, of her.
Yes.
She says that she thinks that all animals are autistic savants, and that would kind of connect with dogs and cats being able to know when their owners are coming back.
And that would also connect to aspects that we're aware of that have been seen of this parallel hominid, and that is the ability to sort of stand still and be very much in the moment, hyper aware. Now, what I think what we should talk about here is the notion that autistic behavior is that seen as a neurological deficit? Is that a change in the brain activity, or is it in reality
just another way of being?
Well, you get a huge debate on that. There are many schools of thought. I'm no expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a neurologist or a psychologist or a scientist. I'm just a guy who thinks about this, who likes to think about this stuff. But it's a deficit in some respects, and it's an advantage in other respects, especially when it as regards these traits that we've been talking about. Like, if that the guy Peake, who is the basis of Rain Man, he could read 2 books at the same time. He could, and memorize the entire thing. You could say, okay, you could read from page 225, beginning of a paragraph, and he could finish the paragraph for you just from memory. And it makes sense that Sasquatch would have something approaching that, because we try to trick them all the time, and we hardly ever succeed. You'll hide a game camera, a trail camera, inside the knot hole of a tree. They've memorized every square inch of their territory, and they walk into it. They say, "Oh, there's a camera."
Yeah.
It's as though you took a dump in the living room of your friend's house. It's so obvious to them, and and they know how we think, and they can anticipate our strategies and everything, and they outthink us. They think circles around us, and so do geniuses. But so. Well, I was going to say something, but it fled out of my mind. Go ahead, Jay.
I had that same moment just at the moment your thought fled out. Maybe that was mutual deleting of the hard drive telepathically there across this global tyranny that we've got.
Yeah.
But I think there's. Are you aware of? Do you remember? You're on my same timeline. You must remember the TV series pre-Twilight Zone, One Step Beyond.
Well, there was Outer Limits.
Yeah, Outer Limits was exceptional. But going back before Twilight Zone was a series called One Step Beyond. They had one documentary episode there in multiple seasons. That episode was about the sacred mushroom. And they took the host with Andrei Puharich, who'd done a lot of studies at Stanford, was the man behind him bringing Uri Geller to the public. And they took him down into South America, and they introduced him first to like a shaman, a bruja there. And there was a donkey had been stolen, and the bruja takes the sacred mushroom and then achieves this heightened telepathy and is able to find where the donkey is.
Or who stole the donkey.
Puharich comes back, goes into his lab, which is his garage, gets the host of the show to ingest mushrooms, and live on air, we see his psi power absolutely develop. And so that is a profound, odd piece of television. I don't think it's included in any of the box sets, but there is a couple of grainy copies. It's only 22 minutes up on YouTube. But it really stated something early in the piece, the possibility that we have this latent, dormant ability, pronounced ability. And when you think of animal species, they all seem to have a heightening of senses that we don't have. Their adrenal cortex runs hard. And that's why my cat will sleep for many hours during the day, because he is ready for action when he is awake and alert beyond what we will ever achieve. And the other thing I see is this ability appears to be there intuitively in children. Now, you're a parent, and you're a parent that raised a daughter in cohabitation with this species. So how does that notion sit with you?
Well, it wasn't really a habituation site or cohabitation. We had a few gestures over the years that made us think that they were around. Mm-hmm. So it's more the places that I've found since she's become a teenager and lost all interest in the subject that are more fruitful. For instance, I have a place that I've been to for the last few years that Sasquatch group is resident there some of the time, and I was able to go enough so that I could hear them and talk to them and make them feel a little bit less alienated from or frightened by me, and vice versa. so that I eventually was able to have an encounter with one of them while she climbed an apple tree. I don't know if we may have some footage of that encounter.
Yes, we do. I think surprisingly, intuitively, and telepathically, we
Yes.
might have stumbled onto some of that
I think
footage.
I downloaded it to you mentally.
Yeah.
Oh no! Yes, you did. Yes,
Yeah,
you did.
there we
You
go.
see, we don't. And I have this relationship with my wife where we have many intuitive moments. Now that could be.
No, we just spend too much time together.
Well, that could be discounted by that. But there are moments where you're astounded by that ability of your minds to speak to each other. And, working with disabled, institutionalized people who have dreadful notes on their history.
Oh, God.
I have found that every time what appears to be neurological damage, you're reading through patients' notes. This individual, even though they're 45, will never have the mentality beyond a 3-year-old. And then I see them do profound things, not articulated in language or semantics, but things that are way beyond that diagnosis. So I think it's just too easy for us to discount these abilities. But should we, do you want to introduce this clip?
There's a whole rich spectrum of intelligence and ways to measure and assess and recognize intelligence, and we often truncate that and reduce it to a certain arc of the spectrum or a certain band of the spectrum, and studying Sasquatch and studying autistic folks helps us to embrace a much larger stretch of this continuum.
It should make us realize how wondrously lucky we all are to have a sense of cognitive ability, to be able to communicate with each other, and which leads me to the thought, and we'll go into your piece in just a second, about how frightening the conflicts are in the community of this research and how deep that character assassination can go online. It just destroys me emotionally. Even into my mid-60s, I think, when am I going to stop living in the schoolyard of intimidation?
People's insecurities.
And it's so disheartening. And I am aware that you have a huge sensitivity to humanity, the people around you. You're not just a parent, you're someone that really cares about this research and wants the layperson and the academic to wake up and accept what is occurring. Yet we go out there, you stick your head above water, and the first thing you become is a target. Anyway, lead us into this clip. So sorry about that digression, but I'm suffering, as we all are.
Well, this clip shows us a young Sasquatch climbing. I explained it in the clip, so I won't go into too much. But
okay,
but I can say that there are people who genuinely are unclear about this because it was nighttime. It was the middle of the night, and I was filming through a night vision camera, and so it's not crystal clear. In fact, it leaves a lot to be desired. But especially if you can show it on a small, if it gets big, the pixelation kind of messes with it, makes it harder to appreciate. And I don't know if we can do that. It's okay either way. But
and I'm not sure if we can, but what we should tell the viewers and the listeners, and especially the listeners, get onto YouTube to view this stuff.
You can actually see
but
it on
go
YouTube.
to Chris's site. It's called Impossible Visits. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And check it out. Check everything out. You've done an incredible documentary free there on how to see a Sasquatch. It runs for about an hour and a half. It's one of the most profound things and this man has not monetized it, humanity.
Yeah.
What is behind this man's sensitivity and love? Wake up.
Preach, brother.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to show it now, and then we'll come back.
A little after midnight on September 20th, 2021, under a full moon, I hear a wood knock on my way to my usual camping spot. The knock comes from the same direction I'm headed, and then, here at this point, I hear a loud thumping on the ground.
Hello?
What I don't notice is this little guy in the background, reaching up the tree trunk. By the time I catch sight of the larger one in the foreground, maybe 7 feet from me, the little one seems to have already climbed up. We'll see him again later.
You here?
I get the sense that she's a female, fishing for something on the ground. Watch the soft fur on her head fluctuating a little. Then she picks up a branch with leaves on it. A few seconds later, she huddles up against the base of the apple tree. Here's her left foot, and she pulls her leg up next to her right leg. In case it helps, here's me for comparison. And then, using her arms only, she pulls herself up, sliding her legs along the trunk. It's a really strange maneuver. Once she gets into the thick of the tree, she steadies herself with a large left hand. This next sequence has given people trouble. It's kind of deceptive because the light of the full moon is shining directly on the left side of her left leg, making it appear much slimmer than it is. Here we can see it bending at the knee. And here is a frame showing moonlight glinting off both legs at once, side by side. Remember the little guy who reached up the trunk at the beginning of the encounter? My interpretation is that he is now up here, and that the larger female has been aware of him and climbing toward him the whole time. I'll bet that's why she never bolted away from me in the first place. Something strange happens here, and I can only guess that it's an appendage of the little one. Some gesture as his mother, or whoever it is, arrives beside him. A few seconds later, from a different vantage point below now, I catch one frame of both of them. It's extremely low resolution, so I don't make any claims as to anatomy, but you can see that there are now two dark masses up inside this apple tree. I'm constantly repositioning on the ground, and for a while I lose track in the confusion of so many branches and leaves. It's the middle of the night, and despite the moonlight, I can't see much at all with my naked eyes, just through the little lit viewfinder of the night vision camera.
Where are you? I think I see you.
Hello.
When I finally reacquire the little one, he seems now to be the only occupant of the tree. He tosses something down. This is my sense of how he's sitting up there. And then he climbs up even farther. And yet, surprisingly, he doesn't seem freaked out at all. In fact, what follows are 2 minutes in which he seems to be quite casually eating. Here he reaches out with his right arm. And then what his hand is doing becomes obscured behind leaves for a few seconds. But suddenly, most of the arm becomes visible again. Hand, lengthy forearm, elbow, and lengthy upper arm. You'll notice the light moonlit fringe of fur along the arm. Compare this eating style with that of this gorilla, grabbing leaves and branches and then just plunking them unceremoniously into his mouth. Here we get a nice profile showing bent arm and back portion of the head. What happens next, it seems, is that he flops his right arm down and takes over with his left. We can distinguish barely the other hand now, operating back in there. And when he pulls it toward his mouth, we can see fingers above and thumb down below. A few moments later comes the best part of the whole encounter. His head appears in this opening, facing forward, just for 4 seconds, kind of bobbing around slightly while watching me and my camera down below. Lightening the image reveals his eye and his pronounced brow ridge. We can infer the 2 large orbitals, befitting a nocturnal predator. Angie of Snow White Bigfoot has gone frame by frame in the program Lightroom. These 69 frames don't show much all run together like this, but we can isolate the single perfect frame. Moonlight glints off the surface of the eye near the top, and we can see both pupil and some of the structure of the iris here. Down below, the rough outline of a few teeth.
There we
That
go.
is sensational.
Well, it leaves a lot to be desired.
Well,
No, it
Every
doesn't.
time I look at it, I see it through the eyes of skeptics, and I know that it's not going to sway anybody. But
you
it's the
shouldn't
best-
give him
it's
that
the
much
best I could
power.
do. It's the best I could do under the circumstance.
I think you're too rough on yourself. And as my wife just said, take that in.
Yeah.
Don't give them,
Don't
that,
much
power.
power.
You are doing extraordinary things based just on your own self. And just listening to that, if I sat down and listened to that of an evening, that would calm me.
Soothe
The
you.
music, your narration, everything to me is verging on the level of a piece of meditation, but it's also so incredibly profound. Screw the skeptics.
Yeah.
If they stuck to the Oxford Dictionary's definition, then they wouldn't be the bloody opinionated bastards that they are.
Well, exactly. Skeptic just means you question things, but
Yeah.
you're able to then, with critical thinking, arrive at a judgment about something. But a
Mhm,
cynic is going
Yeah.
to tear down everything, regardless of the quality of the evidence.
Well, they don't even listen to the evidence, because
Right.
if they actually listened to the evidence, then they would, if they were intelligent thinking people, they would have to go along with the evidence. But
Right.
they just say, nope, not even going to look at it. It's just a bunch of, scat, and that's it.
And I think it's very clear to me, even in that we haven't had that down small and it took up the entire size of the screen. We're just evolving here, so excuse us in that regard. But
Yeah.
it still was incredibly
I was
clear,
good. I saw
and
it.
the way you laid that out. But I think what profoundly affects me is your relationship in the field with this parallel hominid, the gentleness you bring to that. No wonder there's no freak out on behalf of that hominid, because they're really aware of something you've stated many times before, your intent.
Well, you know what happened though? The next year, which is this year,
Mhm.
from May until until November, which for you is winter time, but for us
Yes.
is spring and summer and fall. I went out there and visited at night and sat by the apple tree about 25 feet away, a respectful distance, on 55 separate nights. And I was saying, okay, I'm back. And nothing bad happened from when I filmed you last time. And we had that encounter, that special time between us. So there's no danger in coming back. And I would talk to her and say, how you doing? And I would hear them. I would hear there are these certain telltale whistles that I managed to isolate in my documentary, How to See a Sasquatch. And I would hear wood knocks and I would hear vocalizations, but they never replicated that level of trust, that level of casual proximity that she displayed that night. So it was frustrating, but educational in that you can't depend on, it's not a hard science. You can't replicate things. They come out organically when the situation is right and when they choose. I think there was a young one who climbed up the tree on that occasion, and then the older one climbed up after the young one because I was there, and then they needed to. And then the older one somehow managed to exit when I wasn't looking, and then the little one who reached out her arm or his arm was there by himself. And then when I went to find my thermal camera and came back, even the little one was gone. And so, in retrospect, I could have done so much better, but I also could have done a lot worse. So I'm grateful. I feel privileged to have had that encounter, but it may never happen again.
Did you get a sense of how large the larger one was?
Yes, because the tree is 8 inches in diameter.
Right.
And on some of the videos that you can see on Impossible Visits YouTube channel, I compare my own height to her height with the 8 inches of scale from the tree, and she seems to be between 5 and 6 feet tall.
Right.
If she were standing up, because in the crouch, I just see her in a crouch, and she's 4 feet tall in a crouch.
Right.
So she's about my size, and I'm 6 foot tall. So
right.
She was probably either an older sister or a mother. I mean, who knows? But I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So how is that tree on your property?
No, it's about 2 miles from where I sit talking to you right now.
Right. Okay.
This is a whole other. We need to have a second session together, because then maybe a third and a 12th, because the whole other aspect of this is that for so long, researchers and the general public who was willing to believe that this species could exist thought that they only allowed themselves to stay far away in wilderness enclaves, far from our civilization. And it turns out that they're very near our civilization. Some live far away in the wilderness, but many of them also live cheek by jowl with us here in our residences and our settlements. And you find their structures, and then you audio tape and you listen and you hear them in the middle of the night. You realize, well, they're right there, but nobody knows. They're right under our nose. And this footage, this encounter took place in a park in a wildlife area, just 2.5 miles from where I sit right now. And nobody knows, because nobody has the background to realize that you need to approach the situation this way by going repeatedly night after night and engaging in the very same routine time and time again until they realize that, and talking to them and responding when they knock with your own knock, maybe with your tongue, like, and then that clues them into the fact that they know that you know that they know that we're both here together on the earth, and that we can feel. We can increase our relaxation together if we just give ourselves a chance.
Yeah. Well, we can live in harmony together, possibly, and that's what we might have done in the past.
No, we can't. They can. We can't.
Well, maybe 5 or 10% of us could live in harmony with them.
Well, but the majority
would seek to dominate them, or to, to
maybe they're well aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know whether it's their awareness that keeps them apart, or the deep-seated kind of indirection that is the autistic trait. Because if it were just a conscious awareness and a teaching from one generation to the next, you'd expect that there'd be certain renegades who wouldn't take the teaching,
of course,
and they'd come onto our front porch and sit with us. So it can't be just a conscious free choice. It's got to be something more.
There's a lot of, there are a lot of stories of people who like, that woman, that guy who actually went on that woman's
Enoch,
property.
The book Enoch by Autumn
Autumn Roberts.
Autumn Williams.
Williams, sorry.
Enoch by Autumn Williams is a great book. People should read
Mm.
that book. Yeah.
And I think she was one of the first people like Doug Hychek to actually get this material into the major mainstream through, Animal Planet or one of the Discovery channels. One thing I'd like to digress back to is that, when you said I'm just an ordinary person, well, you're not. You're certainly not a conceited person. You're not an arrogant person. With your master's degree, you could have the word doctor in front of your name and use that to give yourself a bit more legitimacy in this field. But you have a sense of gentleness and humbleness that I can perceive, that you're not going to do that. You're not going to suffer that conceit. But the work you're doing in the field for 17 years screams to me that you are actually an anthropologist. You're a zoologist. You have the patience. I mean, Diane Fossey, people out there in the field, you put those wilderness cameras out into habitations of species you believed are extinct, and you're very lucky to ever have an encounter, to ever actually capture something on film.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think that it's possible that this video is the closest video, even though it's imperfect and many people won't see what I see in it. It might be the closest video taken of them, but I don't know. There may be closer ones that people aren't sharing. That's very likely. But I just want to say for the record, you have to have a PhD to be a doctor, so I couldn't say doctor.
Oh, see, I don't know anything about that orthodox system of education, nor do I respect it.
I just wanted to deflect a little of your praise there because
well, you know what, the wife and I have always sort of stepped and embellished praise, because the one thing I found in the work I did, and I work with homeless people, I work with street alcoholics, is the one thing that's lacking in reality is confidence. Now, I know you have a huge amount of confidence and courage. I'm not passing that off to you, but I think that if you feel that someone has touched your life in a positive way, you need to state that clearly, and you need to get it out as emotionally powerfully as you can to make them aware that their work is worthwhile and to keep inspiring them to doing it. And that's my motivation behind me bending the frigging truth.
Jay, that was a beautiful little soliloquy. I appreciate the sentiment behind it and the eloquence of its delivery.
Well, it's very rarely I get that sort of positivity back, so I'm going to take that on board, Chris, for a crumbling, ridiculous underground animal like myself. Anyway, the whole let's talk about this dragon skull that's appeared in the last, when has this come out into the press? Isn't it the last couple of years they actually found what they think now is another human hominid that ran concurrently or parallel to us? I mean, that doesn't help the theory of evolution, does it, at all?
Well, yeah, it doesn't have any impact on the theory of evolution, because the evolution is not a linear chain. It's a bush. It's a tree with many different branches. I have to tell you, my battery is about to run low. So if we're going to go longer than this, I should go get my plug and plug it in. I have another 4 minutes of battery life.
All right, do you mind going a little bit longer? Is that okay with you, or would you prefer to cut it short, because we've told you to be about an hour or so? I'm happy to keep going.
Well, I do have something scheduled for 8:30, which is
all right.
I
think what that means, Chris, if we can get you on air in front of a worldwide audience to say you will come back and do part 2 with us in the not too distant future, we're happy to let that battery life die. But I'm also disheartened because there is so much we have to talk to you about. But I know that also you're going to go on with Sarah Bignell from Australian Yowie Hunters and Australian Yowie Research on her Yowie Central program. That's another way for the Australian population. Where can we get your books from, Chris? Are they all on Amazon?
I will say, though, that the Dragon Man is fascinating. It could very well be a Denisovan, and Denisovans were huge. Yes. They had huge teeth, many times the size of our own molars, found in the Siberian cave, and they could very well be the progenitor, the male progenitor of the Sasquatch species, because as Melba Ketchum found, and I have not seen a successful debunking of her work yet, she found that the mitochondrial DNA in Sasquatch tissue cells is human, our human.
Yep.
You know, there's so much more to speak to you about. We're running out of time, and Melba Catcham and the DNA Project
Yeah.
is profound, and that woman has, you know, we need to all stand up for her because
Talk about
she's been
taking the slings and arrows of hate.
Yeah.
frightening. It's horrible.
It's
Hey,
horrifying.
listen, we've all got one life to live. It goes in the blink of an eye. If you can't say anything nice, step out of the equation. Have a look at this little news story just for a bit of a giggle.
They are a mystery in the northern New Mexico forest and a big fire hazard. Somebody has been building giant wooden structures near popular hiking paths. News 13's Chris McKee is here to show us. Chris?
Yeah, Dean, Santa Fe National Forest officials say crews have found a lot of these wood structures north of the city. They don't know who's building these or why. They say it needs to stop immediately.
They may have as many as 1,000 pieces of wood in them.
It's hard to grasp just how big these wood structures are until you see someone standing next to them.
And some of them are as much as 2, sometimes even 3 stories tall, and they can be as much as 20 feet in diameter.
Santa Fe National Forest spokeswoman Julie-Ann Overton is talking about these massive wood piles almost built like teepees. Crews have found around a dozen of them in the National Forest land north of Santa Fe city limits around the Espanola Ranger District.
So we've spotted a bunch of them in Aspen Vista, Big Tasuki drainage, and even on the Windsor Trail.
They don't know who made them or why, but say it's a problem. Some of the stick pyramids have even had fire pits in them.
The wood is very dry, very seasoned, so it's really a huge fire risk.
They say it's been a problem over the last year, but have seen more of these structures recently near the Ski Santa Fe area. Some have been right along well-used trails. Crews are now working to dismantle the ones they find. They're also warning whoever's building them to stop.
They could come crashing down, and again, the fire risk is extreme.
Now, the Santa Fe National Forest says if you see one of these structures, give their office a call, or you can even post about it on their Facebook page. Try to take pictures, give crews a location of where you're seeing it. We're told so.
I don't know if you'd seen that news report, but we want to get in touch with the people building those things.
I remember that report. That was a few years ago. And
Yeah.
the thing is, they say fire rings, which makes the viewer think it's people. But lots of times, Sasquatch will make fake
Yes.
fire rings, and you can
Yeah.
tell there's never been any fire in them. They'll have like this little kindling, but there's no soot whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
They seem to replicate human behavior in that
replicating.
regard.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a video on my YouTube channel, Impossible Visits, called Through the Looking Glass, where I document to music a bunch of these little fake fire rings. So if anybody wants to look that up, go ahead. That would be kind of fun.
We
Okay.
cannot thank you enough for your time. We're extremely humbled, and we realize that you have got a much more massive reach than we will ever have. But you are a profound researcher. We want to give you as much power and strength. We want people to go out and purchase your books, go on Impossible Visits,
Yes.
find the donate button. If you've got a donate button, you need to have assistance there. You need someone to
I
throw
don't have a
dollars.
donate button, and I don't have a Patreon thing because
Well-
I never like that paywall that people put up. I just like to
Yep.
share my work,
Cool.
and so.
Yeah.
But you can find my books on Amazon if you wish, and I appreciate everybody who's been listening tonight and watching tonight, and I can't wait to come back.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I have
well,
We'll
an
organise
I
that
have an
very
even
soon.
newer book that I want to send you guys, and then we can maybe talk about that. It's newer than the autism book. And
Okay.
it seeks to place in context, in the context of the long history of spiritual research and communication with the spirit world, to place that in context with the paranormal aspects of Sasquatch.
Mhm.
And so
very interesting.
on Facebook, I'd like to have your address, and I will send you that book, and we can talk about it.
Okay.
Well, you know what? The reality is we should be purchasing that book because your books sell for very little and everyone should support your profound. And it just screams to me that you won't have a paywall up. And that means you're a very generous, kind-hearted individual. And we respect and love you for who you are. And thank you so much for your time, Christopher Noel.
Well, my goodness, you guys have been just like being in a bath of warm honey.
And you know what?
Thank
As
you.
far as I'm concerned, I'm going to call you Doctor. You're my Doctor Who.
Okay.
Very well
Good night,
done. Very
Chris, and
well.
take good care.
Very
All
well.
right. We
Good
will
night.
we will organise to have you back and go further.
I will look
down this
forward to
rabbit
it.
hole.
I will look
Yeah.
forward to it. Thank you for being such kind
Absolutely.
hosts.
All
And
right.
if you ever come to Australia, you come and stay with us. We live in a warehouse full of
of
film, full of literature, full of art, and we just adore you.
Okay.
All right. We will be back next week with another interview. And yeah, thanks for listening and watching.
I don't know if it'll reach the profound heights we did today.
Probably not. What could reach these heights?
Exactly.
Nothing.
Exactly.
All right, Chris. Good night and take good care, and all the best to you and your family.
Bye.
Good night, Australia.
Bye.
We loved having you.